I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. America is back and we're just getting started. The US president addresses the US Congress in a historic speech. A summit at the White House. Macron and Starmer prepared to accompany Zelensky to Washington for a second showdown with President Trump as the CIA pours intelligence to Ukraine. Florida launches a criminal investigation into the Tate brothers who touched down in the Sunshine State last week. And the US rejects the Arab leaders' post-war plan for Gaza as Trump stands by his takeover vision. To our top story, and President Trump has given the longest ever presidential speech to US Congress for the first time since his return to the White House. The US president spoke for more than an hour and 40 minutes, breaking the previous record set by President Bill Clinton back in 2000. During his speech, Trump declared the America dream is unstoppable 6 weeks after taking power, from slashing the federal workforce to cracking down on immigration, imposing tariffs on America's biggest traders, and the ongoing talks between the US and Ukraine. He told any doubters he was just getting started. Here's a reminder.
Members of the United States Congress, thank you very much. And to my fellow citizens, America is back. 6 weeks ago, I stood beneath the dome of this Capitol and proclaimed the dawn of the golden age of America. From that moment on, it has been nothing but swift and unrelenting action to usher in the greatest and most successful era in the history of our country. We have accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
We can now go live to Washington to speak to our correspondent, Kate Fisher. Kate, thank you for joining me. A really lengthy address, which also included him reading out a letter from Volodymyr Zelensky, a similar sounding message to the one posted earlier on X.
Yeah, that's right. This was a much more conciliatory tone, really, from President Trump vis-a-vis Ukraine. Obviously, there was that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office last week, but he seemed to be pleased that President Zelensky of Ukraine had reached out to him with this letter that he said he had just received. He said he appreciated it and that he was ready to sign the minerals deal. He kind of suggested that the letter, the content of the letter, was similar to what Mr. Zelensky had put on social media earlier that day. So essentially reiterating Ukraine's commitment to peace, its readiness to get to the negotiating table as soon as possible, and really complimenting the US, which of course is important with Mr. Trump, saying it valued what they had done already and they were ready to work under Mr. Trump's strong leadership. However, Donald Trump didn't share any firm commitments about what will happen next.
And it's been announced that Macron, Starmer and Zelensky will all meet Trump at the White House to discuss the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And this really comes at a time when the CIA has paused intelligence support to Ukraine. When are we expecting that meeting to take place?
Yeah, that's another blow for the Ukrainians. The announcement that they will no longer be receiving US intelligence. Already there's been a pause in the delivery of US weapons to the Ukrainians. The US really trying to turn the screws on Zelensky, it feels like. In terms of this planned meeting where you would see Prime Minister Starmer of the UK, President Macron of France and President Zelensky of Ukraine all coming to Washington at the same time for a meeting with Trump to try to unveil kind of a blueprint for peace that would perhaps see French and British troops on the ground with some kind of US backstop. That's what we think this blueprint would include. There has been murmurings from Paris that that is on the cards and from Downing Street, but there have been no firm commitments from either about when this could take place. And a French spokeswoman saying that this was at the moment more of a hope and a wish than a firm date in the diary.
And the president shouted out Elon Musk and his Doge team during his speech as that bromance seems to grow. Many were surprised to see how Elon Musk was dressed. All eyes were on this, and he was actually in a suit, wasn't he?
Yeah, it's the first time we've seen him dressed like that since he kind of began working for President Trump. Certainly the first time in public. President Trump hailed him during his speech, applauded the work he was doing. There was no sign of people had predicted that perhaps these two men with large egos and lots of money might end up not getting along quite as well. But certainly Donald Trump gave him a lot of praise in the speech at Congress last night and asked Republicans and Democrats to thank him too. And he went through many of the what he sees as achievements that Elon Musk has made under the Department of Government Efficiency, which he is heading, and where federal agencies are being gutted, people are being laid off, and many programs have been closed. And Donald Trump ran through several of those, particularly those foreign aid programs. He was fairly dismissive in that list. It took several minutes to go through. He suggested that no one had heard of the African country of Lesotho, for example. So it was, but that got a lot of support from Republicans in the audience. And yes, Elon Musk in a suit and smiling and taking the praise from the president.
And actually looking pretty smart, if I say so myself. But Kate, Trump also mentioned Greenland and his desire for the US to acquire it. We're going to get it one way or another, he said. He's just not letting this idea go, is he?
Yeah, this is clearly really important to him. He made it clear that he would like to not just rule the US, but expand the territory of the US when he came to the presidency. He suggested in this speech that it was going to happen, as you say, and he said that it was vital for national and international security, suggesting this isn't just sort of a personal ambition of his, but that also he sees it as important for balancing out between Russia and China, who also have interests in the Arctic, and he wants to see a strong US presence there. He did say, though, that we strongly support Greenland's right to determine its own future, but if you choose us, we will welcome you into the United States.
Kate Fisher in Washington, thank you so much for that. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Over 200 protesters have gathered in front of Columbia University in New York against former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who was visiting the campus. One of the protesting groups said it sent a message that the university values some voices over others. President Trump is threatening to cut federal funding for schools that allow what he sees as illegal protests. Now, North Korea may be close to launching its first airborne early warning aircraft. That's according to satellite imagery, which shows a modified Illusion IL-76 plane parked at Pyongyang Airport. The jet could assist in aerial surveillance, making it a significant upgrade to the Hermit Kingdom's aging Air Force. German defence companies are encouraging the country's ailing auto industry for more building capacity as Europe prepares to raise military spending. For decades, car makers have fueled Germany's economy, but job cuts and factory closures are plaguing the once thriving industry. Experts say a pivot towards defence production could give an injection to Germany's finances. And Emma Raducanu has spoken out about her stalker experience. The British tennis champion said she couldn't see the ball through her tears and could barely breathe after being targeted during the Dubai Open. The man in question was promptly removed by police and also given a restraining order. Now, the Trump administration has rejected plans regarding the reconstruction of Gaza put forward by Arab leaders. The White House responded to a $53 billion alternative idea to Trump's original Gaza takeover, which had included the displacement of Gazans. The U.S. said the president stood by his own vision, which included expelling Palestinian residents and transforming it into the riviera of the Middle East, which would be owned by the United States. They added the proposal put forward by the Arab nations in Cairo did not address the reality that Gaza is currently inhabitable and somewhere where residents cannot humanely live. We can now go live to Galicia to speak to author and Middle East correspondent Jotam Confino. Jotam, thank you so much for joining me. Can you provide the details of the Arab leaders' proposal and tell us what objections the Trump administration has to the plans?
Yeah, so let's start with the plan. First of all, it's very comprehensive. And on paper, it looks amazing. It's talking about creating 500,000 new jobs in Gaza. It's talking about building 400,000 housing units that can accommodate 2.7 million people. Industrial zones, agricultural zones will be built. They're talking about building 120 hospitals, a seaport, an international airport. The list is very, very long of amazing initiatives. But one thing that it does not address is Hamas. Hamas is not mentioned a single time in this document that's over 100 pages long. What it does say is that there will be an interim government, a civil administration in Gaza, which will be governed by independent technocrats. And then after 6 months, the Palestinian Authority will take over control with Gaza. But the fact that Hamas is not mentioned once, or even the possibility of removing or disarming Hamas, that is what has led Donald Trump, I believe, to dismiss this plan, because Donald Trump has made it very clear, and so has Israel, that they will not accept any plan of Gaza where Hamas stays in power. So the United States are now saying this is not a viable plan. We need a Hamas-free Gaza, is what they're saying.
What kind of future does Hamas have in Gaza? The US doesn't want them there, like you've just told me, nor does Netanyahu. Hamas has told Al Arabiya they would be willing to step aside if it was kept as an internal matter without regional or international parties' involvement. This does seem unlikely.
It does seem completely unlikely, and Hamas has actually also made it clear a few times that they're not willing to lay down their weapons. And also, why should they? They're back in power now. They control Gaza, and that's what they would like to continue to do. Now, maybe they would be interested in having some sort of a solution where a government includes both the PA and Hamas, but that's not something that Israel wants to accept. So we're at a we're at a crossroads here, really, because Hamas is refusing to give up its power. Israel is refusing to Hamas to stay in power. So inevitably, we're going to see the war resume. And this is a failure not only by Israel for not coming up with a plan for the day after, but by the international community as well, to have 16 months of war and not come up with a viable plan to remove Hamas from power.
Has Benjamin Netanyahu responded to either the Arab leaders' plans or to Trump's response? What does he envision for a post-war Gaza? As you said, they haven't come up with a plan.
They haven't. Netanyahu wants to basically do what Trump does, which is he's placing the ball in Donald Trump's court. He's saying, if you want to remove 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, be my guest. That's the best solution for Netanyahu. That's a headache gone for him, but of course it's unrealistic. If we look at what the foreign ministry said officially in response to this plan initiated by Egypt, then they're saying, rightly so also, that it doesn't address the fact that Hamas is still present. And it also says that it's basically building on outdated ideas to recreate Gaza and to reestablish a good community there that isn't governed by a terrorist organization. So the foreign ministry is completely dismissing this, and they do that because they know that Donald Trump is backing them in this.
We're led to believe that the Arab nation's $53 billion proposal will be presented to Trump in the coming weeks. Any idea of what more we know on this?
I would say that before we can start more specifically about the reconstruction of Gaza, which is obviously a huge undertaking and it's very, very pressing issue, it has to be rebuilt. But before we get there, we need to know if Hamas and Israel are going to continue the ceasefire or if they're going to go back to war, because it looks currently like Israel is about to resume the war with Hamas. Israel wants to expand the first phase of the ceasefire, which Hamas doesn't want to. They want to go straight into the phase 2 of the ceasefire, where Israel is going to remove all of its troops from Gaza, and that's something Israel is not interested in. So unless we continue the ceasefire, there'll be a war, and then you can forget anything about a reconstruction. There'll be more death and more destruction in Gaza, and that's obviously something that most people hope we can avoid.
Jotam Confino, author and Middle East correspondent, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Let's get into this further with former senior CIA officer Robert Grenier. Robert, great to have you on the show tonight. I was just wondering if you could react to what Jotam was actually saying there about the war resuming and there not being any sort of resolution when it comes to Hamas.
Well, I couldn't agree with him more. It's very clear that the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu will certainly not accept a continuation of Hamas in Gaza, whether in a formal leadership role or standing behind an alternative leadership, as seems to be suggested by the Egyptians. And so it seems almost inevitable that we were going to be returning to active hostilities in the Gaza Strip.
Was it a big surprise to you that Trump and Israel rejected this alternative plan to Gaza by the Arab leaders? Because obviously they've come up with this since Donald Trump said he wanted to turn it into the riviera of the Middle East.
No, I'm not at all surprised by this rejection. I think the one positive thing that you could say about Trump's analysis of the situation is that he's right in that if we continue to do the same thing over and over again, we're going to end up in precisely the same place. And so for the Arabs to step up and reconstruct Gaza under circumstances where it seems almost inevitable that eventually Hamas will return to resistance, which will then motivate the Israelis to do precisely what they have done on numerous occasions in the past, which is to launch attacks not only on armed resistance, but also on the civilian population and the civilian infrastructure. So I can understand why there would be some reluctance on the part of the Arabs to simply go around this circle once again. So that's the reason, the stated reason why Donald Trump will not support this initiative. But as was just pointed out, there really are no clear alternatives on the horizon.
Robert, but what will this actually mean if Israel resumes its attacks on Hamas? What will it mean for the wider Middle East and the security concerns around that, the stability of the Middle East?
Well, I mean, we've just seen 15 months of active warfare in Gaza, a campaign by Israel that is generally considered by a great many people, myself very much included, as a rolling war crime. And it really hasn't destabilized the Middle East. Now, obviously, we had the actions of the so-called axis of resistance. Their combined reaction to Israel has not been successful. Hezbollah has been greatly weakened in Lebanon. The Iranians have also been greatly weakened, and so it doesn't seem as though there's any real nexus of military opposition to Israel. And absent that, or some sort of compelling and effective resistance to Israeli policy from outside the region, to include the European Union and the United States, it appears as though history is simply going to continue on the same line.
I just want to shift gear a little bit. The US is also ramping up pressure on Ukraine, cutting off intelligence sharing with Kyiv. What kind of ramifications will this have?
I'm sorry, what sort of implications will this have?
What sort of implications will this have for Ukraine if this intelligence sharing is no longer available from the US?
Well, this is a very serious blow to Ukraine. They rely very heavily on U.S. supplied weaponry. The U.S. is certainly by no means the only entity which is providing military support. But U.S. intelligence support for Ukraine is somewhat unique. There's no one else, to include the Europeans, who can provide the same sorts of support. And it's something that is extremely important to their overall war effort. So this is just one more element in what is a clear attempt on the part of Trump and his administration to exert irresistible pressure on the Ukrainians to cave to Russian demands and to make a peace deal that is essentially on their terms.
So do you think that we are close to a peace deal, and do you think Russia does want to negotiate?
Well, that's very much an open question. Right now, it seems to me that it would be very much in the Russian interest to simply allow nature to take its course, to allow the U.S. to ramp up pressure on the Ukrainians, essentially to cave to their demands. I don't think that the Russians want to bargain against themselves at this point. But I think the overall outline of at least an interim solution acceptable to them is relatively clear, and I think that they are counting on the U.S. to deliver that to them.
And in other news, Florida has launched a criminal investigation into the Tate brothers. The state's governor has said they're not welcome, but they've hit back saying they're innocent. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, it's really kind of an extraordinary situation. Now, it's true that the Tates haven't been convicted in any jurisdiction thus far. It was not at all anticipated that they would be able to leave Romania, where they are under active investigation and have been indicted. It appears, the situation is very unclear, but it appears that it was a roving envoy of Mr. Trump's, Richard Grenier, who intervened with Romanian authorities to get them to release these individuals with the provision that they needed to return to court, I believe, on the 24th of March. So this is really quite extraordinary. Clearly, Governor DeSantis of Florida is not particularly happy with it. He seems to find the charges against these people somewhat compelling, at least to the point of allowing a local investigation to go forward. But the fact that these people were released from Romania and allowed to return to the United States, where, after all, they do have citizenship, is really quite an extraordinary turn. Trump himself is saying that he knows nothing about it, but it appears to have at least some of his fingerprints on it.
Robert Grenier, former senior CIA officer, thank you so much for talking to me.
You're very welcome.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced he'll address the nation later this evening. In a statement released on X, he said, "In this moment of uncertainty, where the world is confronted by large challenges, I will address you tonight." It comes as Europe's leaders prepare to meet tomorrow at an emergency summit on Ukraine and European defence. At least 12 people have been killed after a pair of suicide bombers drove vehicles filled with explosives into a security installation in Pakistan. The blast also blew the roof of a nearby mosque by a market. Security forces did manage to stop the militants from entering the military facility, and 6 of them were killed. 2 Philippine Air Force pilots have been killed after their aircraft crashed during a mission in Bukidnon province. The Philippine Air Force have said the FA-50 fighter lost contact shortly after midnight, prompting a search and rescue operation. The wreckage of the jet and the 2 pilots were found in the Kalaltungan Mountains. And the plans to mark the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, also known as VE Day in Great Britain, have been announced. Residents have been asked to celebrate the occasion with street parties. A flypast involving the iconic Red Arrows, military processions and concerts will also take place. VE Day is celebrated on the 8th of May each year to mark the day the Allies formally accepted Germany's surrender in 1945. Pope Francis rested well last night and woke up slightly earlier this morning, according to the Vatican. The 88-year-old Pope is currently receiving treatment for bilateral pneumonia at Rome's Gemelli Hospital. Today, he continued to have non-invasive mechanical ventilation, with his clinical condition remaining stable. I'm now joined by international lawyer and also church consultant, Dr. Harry Hagopian. Harry, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining me again. Firstly, tell us about this non-invasive mechanical ventilation and how long are we expecting the Pope to be treated with it?
Well, good evening, Leigh Ann. It's difficult for me to guess how long he's going to be treated. Remember, he's been there for almost at the Gemelli Hospital for almost 3 weeks. And what they've been doing is most of the time it's been non-invasive. Non-invasive means for anybody who's been to hospital or found himself or herself in a hospital bed, they would simply put a mask on your face with some mildly high pressure high flow oxygen in order to help the patient to breathe more easily. It turns to invasive, and it's happened a couple of times when the Pope had acute respiratory failure, where they basically stick a tube through the nostrils and goes down into the windpipe in order to help him breathe more easily, particularly since he had an accumulation of mucus in the endobronchial tubes, and therefore that was preventing him from breathing properly. And remember, he's 88 years old. He's an old man who has had a very hard life. And for the last 13 years that he's been a pope, he's been working quite hard. People don't realize how hard a worker he is. And therefore, they're now pretty much trying to make sure that nothing untoward or more untoward, if you want, happens, so that gradually his lungs begin to get rid of the infection and he begins to breathe more easily on his own. But that's not yet happened.
And also, today is Ash Wednesday. We know the Pope missed the run-up to Lent and will be missing today's service too. Who will be taking his place?
Well, Ash Wednesday is something that Christians and particularly Catholics across the whole world celebrate. It's the beginning of the Lent period, the 40 days that leads to the feast of Easter. And today, usually the Pope is the one who leads the procession on Ash Wednesday. But given what we know, one of the cardinals, in this case it was Cardinal Angelo De Donatis, one of the Italian cardinals who's responsible for one of the departments at the Vatican. He's the one who led the procession. One of the things that I always tell associates and friends when they express concern about how is the Vatican coping with the Pope being at Gemelli for 3 weeks in a rather serious situation, I always tell them that the Vatican is like an 8-cylinder car. It goes on quite well, and if one driver is not there, another driver can handle the car. So they have default options, and today was one example of that default option taking place.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm sure the Vatican is run extremely well. But what do we know about his instructions if his health declines? What does the Catholic faith allow?
Well, you know what, Leigh Ann, I mean, one of the things, I was having a chat with a friend earlier today in a coffee shop, and inevitably the question, as is on the minds of a lot of people, was, Harry, what do you think is wrong? What is the damage? What's happening to the Pope? And I said to him, you know what I said? I heard somebody on an Italian channel saying that, how should I put it? You have a fire in your house. You manage to put out the fire, but the question doesn't stop there. The question is then, how much damage has that fire caused? And this is what the specialists and the doctors at Gemelli Hospital are trying to figure out, because the level of the damage and the level of how well he will be able to get out of this infection, this respiratory failure that he's had, and the infection of the, you called it a bilateral pneumonia, which basically means that he's got the infection in both lungs. And given that one of the lungs has part of it removed when he was young and had an inflammation, a pleurisy, what will happen is it is a question of, can he resume his function, his ministry as a pope? And that is where people are saying there are 3 options. And I'm being a little bit of a prophet here, so forgive me. One is that he reestablishes himself, he gets well, he goes and, as an 88-year-old could do, assumes his position as Pope again. That, to me, at the moment is unlikely. The other one is that he will go into convalescence if he manages to get out of hospital, because he's had a pretty bad knock, and that could be a short convalescence or a long convalescence. And on the basis of that one, I believe, and there is precedent with Pope Benedict XVI before him, that he might decide suddenly, unpredictably, because he's quite an opinionated man, he might decide to resign. And of course, the worst situation is if it's not a resignation or recovery, that it's death, in which case the Vatican will go into mourning, and then there will be a consistory, a meeting of all the cardinals from all over the world who will come. And as some of your viewers might have seen in that wonderful film, Conclave, they will then elect a new pope. So these are the 3 options that are open at the moment. Which one will it happen? It depends how much damage the fire will cause.
Well, you can always be a prophet on my show, Dr. Harry Hagopian, international lawyer.
My pleasure, Leigh Ann.
Yes, love having you on, and church consultant. Thank you once again for joining me. Let's take a look at the top business news. China is prioritizing consumer spending ahead of technology and economic worries weigh on the economy. Encouraging reluctant consumers to spend has been elevated to the top of Beijing's agenda for this year, as lawmakers look to rectify imbalances in the world's second largest economy. During his speech at the annual meeting of the country's parliament, Chinese Premier Li said China is looking to boost consumption to meet 5% growth goal in 2025. The Hong Kong-based company CK Hutchinson Holding has agreed to sell most of its stake in its 2 ports on a Panama Canal to a group led by US investment firm BlackRock. The sale comes after President Donald Trump said the US should take control of the major shipping route and complained it was under Chinese control. The company said it would sell its interests as part of a deal worth $22.8 billion. Turning to sports news now. LeBron James has become the first player in the NBA to reach the momentous milestone of 50,000 points. James reached the record after hitting a three-pointer in the first quarter of the Lakers' win over the Pelicans in Los Angeles on Tuesday night. At the age of 40, he has already solidified his place as the NBA's all-time leading scorer in both regular season and playoff games. And Arsenal will derive a great deal of confidence from their 7-1 thrashing of PSV Eindhoven in the first leg of the Champions League last 16 tie on Tuesday. Manager Mikel Arteta says the Premier League club are determined to keep the momentum rolling. Arsenal's biggest away win in a European club competition puts them in a position to advance to the quarter-finals, where they will meet either Atletico Madrid or Real Madrid. Now, a reminder of our top stories. America is back and we're just getting started. The US president addresses a US Congress in a historic speech. A summit at the White House, Macron and Starmer prepared to accompany Zelensky to Washington for a second showdown with President Trump as the CIA pours intelligence to Ukraine. Florida launches a criminal investigation into the Tate brothers who touched down in the Sunshine State last week. And the US rejects the Arab leaders' post-war plan for Gaza as Trump stands by his takeover vision. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And of course, don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining me.